All right. Well, let's get started here this afternoon. My name is John Friedman. I'm the dean here at the Watson School for International and Public Affairs. And it's my special pleasure to welcome you all here to the inaugural Walter Family Lecture Series. We are really blessed this afternoon to have members of the Walter family, and especially to recognize Samantha Walter, who's a recent graduate of the class of 2024 here with us this afternoon. Samantha, thank you so much for your generous support of this program and for your commitment to expanding opportunities to our students beyond the classroom. These experiences and lectures like today are such an important part of what makes a Brown education and what makes a Watson education so meaningful, and we're truly grateful of your support. So thank you very much. Before introducing today's distinguished speaker, I just want to do a few kind of housekeeping matters. So the first thing is, I think you all hopefully saw the sign on the way in. We're recording this afternoon's talk. We're going to post it online, and you should feel free to check it out there or share it with your friends who weren't able to make it this afternoon. Today's talk is another in our series of launch year events designed to foster conversations on some of the world's most important issues with some of its leading policymakers. And these visitors are here to contribute their incredible experience and perspective to our exchange of ideas here at Watson. And I really think this is essential to our mission of promoting a just, peaceful, and prosperous world through research and teaching. Over the course of today's event or others at Watson, you may hear perspectives you disagree with, perhaps that you really, really disagree with, and that's okay. That's a good thing. We're here to foster discussion and debate. Understanding these disagreements is a crucial part of what we're trying to do in education, and it's a crucial part of what it means to make progress on these difficult policy issues. I think we best make progress in these things by being respectful, curious, and gracious, respectful of each other's differences, curious to understand more of what's behind divergent perspectives, and gracious in interpreting the intent of others' comments. And so you may feel the need to protest, and that's okay too, but your right to protest cannot interfere with everybody else's ability to participate in today's conversation, even for a brief time. But we've done a bunch of these in the past, and I'm confident that our community has the capacity to really learn from these important conversations. And so with that, let's get to today's exciting speaker. It's really my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce our guest today, Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr. She's a leader whose work really exemplifies what effective, grounded public service looks like. As the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone, since 2018, she has taken on the complex day-to-day challenges of governing a rapidly growing and dynamic city, and in many ways focusing on issues that will be familiar to many of us: environmental resilience, public health, infrastructure, and how to create inclusive economic opportunity. Her work on urban climate adaptation and on waste management in particular has gained global recognition, not only for its innovation, but for the practicality and its impact on residents' daily lives. And this work, among many other distinguished roles, has led her to serve as the co-chair of the C40 Global Cities Network of Mayors, who are powering climate change action through local policy. Now, before entering politics, she worked for 25 years as an accountant and advisor to firms and governments around the world, as well as working for the Inspiring Digital Enterprise Award Foundation in the UK. And she returned to Sierra Leone to join the National Ebola Response Center in 2014, and was really work there for which she was made both an officer of the British Empire. She was awarded an Ebola Gold Medal from the President of Sierra Leone, and that launched her first into public service, more broadly as part of the delivery team, leading that for the president's recovery priorities, and a range of other activities, ultimately leading her to become mayor of Sierra Leone. And I think this focus on delivery, we're going to talk about that a lot today. It's been a thread through all of her career, and her focus on data-driven decision-making and community engagement, system accountability have just been amazing in this context. And I think given that most of global population growth over the next generation, it will happen in cities like Freetown. And so her career and experience today offers us a powerful example of what it means to translate ideas into meaningful real-world impact and in one of the most important settings for this globally. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr to Brown and to the Watson School. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to start by giving you an opportunity to tell us here about the particular part of your journey where you went from being in the private sector and in as a public servant and into politics and kind of putting yourself out there as a candidate. This is a big transition that really underpinned all of what you've done in Freetown over the last 8 years. What convinced you to make that jump into politics?
Not understanding it. So, as you mentioned when you were just reading a bit of the bio, I stepped forward to volunteer during the Ebola pandemic because I just couldn't watch it on TV, and in doing so, I left home for 3 months, said goodbye to my husband and my kids, said I'll be back. It was November the 13th. I said, I'll be back in 3 months. When I got there, I couldn't leave. I came home briefly for Christmas. I couldn't even spend New Year. I just couldn't find peace, just relaxing when I knew what was going on. So I went back, as you mentioned, at the end of the outbreak, was asked to support the post-Ebola recovery program. Given my background, it seemed like a sensible thing to do. Project management, managing consulting. We can do this, 18 months, I'll be done. But I suppose when I was doing that role, the issues, particularly of sanitation, and to a degree of the environment, the trees, the deforestation that was going on, really struck me. But sanitation was something that I was able to get right into because in that role, I actually instituted something called Operation Clean Freetown, and there was a meeting when somebody who'd been in the sanitation space, in the waste management space, came up to me and said, "You've done more in the last few months in this space than we've done in decades. We really need you to run for mayor. You need to run for mayor." And I was like, and that was May 2017. And I say I did it because I didn't understand what I was doing. And I really mean that because the next day I woke up in the morning and it was in my head and I called my husband. I was like, Amy said I should run for mayor. And I'm thinking about it. And as I drove to work the next day, I kept looking around. I was going, I'll fix this. I'll fix that. I'll fix that. By the time I got to the office, I was pumped. I was like, I'm running for mayor. Now, I had no idea of the sort of the political lens or the political implications of that. For me, it was another project. And when I said I didn't know, I took for granted so many things. I totally overestimated the scope of what the mayor's role was, the mandate, the power, and the finance. So I was very fortunate to, at the time, have the confidence of the then president and leader of the party, which I then joined and contested for the mayoral symbol and won it. So that pivot, that move from the private sector to the public sector was sort of done with rose-tinted glasses, thinking that what I was doing in the private sector, I would just be able to come and apply it and fix all these things. The reality is quite different, but what has remained the same is a conviction that the processes, the data approach, the inclusive approach that I've used previously in the outbreak, in the work that I did, was transferable into the public sector. That hasn't changed. The uphill task or the incline is steeper than I'd imagined, but it's not insurmountable.
So tell us a little bit more about that. You're elected mayor and you arrive in the office and it turns out to be a lot harder to fix some of these problems than you had initially thought. Tell us about kind of your first few months.
So Dean Friedman is leading. That's what you call a leading question, because we spoke earlier and he knows what happened on my very first day. So I walk into the office. It's the 13th of May, 2018. I sit at the desk and the first thing that strikes me is there's no internet. And I'm like, what you guys do here? Got internet connected that day, but in many ways that really kind of gives you a picture, contextualizes the work environment. So having a background, so I mentioned I'm a chartered accountant. To be a chartered accountant in the UK, equivalent of a CPA here, there's a certain amount of audit work you have to do as just part of the process. And so I'm very process oriented. You know, the first thing I'm doing is like drawing my process charts for every department. Who does what, how does it go, where does it go from here? And I very quickly found out that for the department which is responsible for the majority of the revenue of council, the property database, and you all be familiar with that. You all pay, I don't know if it's called property tax here. Yeah, you all pay property tax. That's the biggest revenue for any local council. Our property database was a book. It wasn't an Excel. It wasn't a database. It was a ledger with writing by hand. So changing that was imperative. We managed to do that. We did do that. We now have a digitized system, satellite image of all the properties. And we moved from having 30,000 properties in the books to 129,000 and increased revenue 7-fold immediately, with now that growing to a potential of over 10-fold. So how did it start? And how's it going? How it started was me landing into an environment that I had totally underestimated, and having powers that I had totally underestimated as well. But what was the good thing? Freetonians were on board. When I campaigned for my position as mayor, I actually told them I was going to increase taxes, and they still voted for me. So when we did that, they weren't surprised. Of course, you had people who were not happy, but by and large, the support of Freetonians was very evident, because we actually had people coming to come and pay their taxes. People who had never paid taxes. Obviously, if you only have 30,000, that means 70% of your population of homeowners had never paid tax. So having that acceptance was quite significant. And I think coming alongside that, or part of the reasons for that, was because I had a 100-day plan. Many times when you're campaigning, you're asked, what's your 100-day plan? What are you going to do in the first 100 days? And I said to everybody, I'm going to plan. I'm not moving from that. I'm going to plan. So in the first 100 days, we planned, but we did have some quick wins. And one of those quick wins was something which the language I used was not climate, but it was a climate mitigation strategy, which was to deal with the floods. We've been inundated. We've been really, really bogged down with floods in the city. And so in my first 100 days, we introduced the flood mitigation strategies, which was just really common sense in terms of understanding what the sources were, where the bottlenecks were, and being able to unlock those. So the combination of people seeing action, and you seeing transparency being built into the tax system was a good one. And it did result in an increase in uptake of tax.
So I want to return to these themes of how do you build a functioning and democratically accountable government later on. But let's dig more into the climate set of topics that you just mentioned. This is something that you've I think really become a global leader on. And so first, just tell us, how is climate change affecting Freetown? You mentioned floods as one example. And what are some of the different policies that you've put in place in order to help deal with that?
So I think I just want to take a moment to give you a picture of Freetown. I mean, look around the room. How many people have been to Freetown? 2. Okay, I was not expecting that. All right. Well, for those who haven't, Freetown is only 82 square kilometers in size. And it has a population which is double the population of Rhode Island. It wasn't always like that. It's geographically or demographically, it is nestled between a range of mountains and the Atlantic Ocean. And growing up, the population was 500,000 people, which is probably closer to the sort of population sizes you're accustomed to in cities in your area. The war that happened from 1991 to 2001 led to an increase of the population, but only to about 750,000. Then in the years that followed up to about 2015, it was about 1,055,000. Then we had a massive increase, and that increase continues to be fueled by a combination of factors, one of which is climate change. And that's because of the impact on farming populations of the change in climate, the extremes that we're now facing, from floods, rain when we shouldn't have it. So it's also not just a question of how much rain or how little rain, but the climate's changing and not aligning anymore with harvest times, with planting times. And that has actually led to a significant increase in the population. It's not, I can't ignore the fact that failure of government to invest in services and in facilities outside of the capital also plays a significant role. But certainly when 60% of your population are subsistence farmers, if you're farming, your weather patterns go out of sync, and they don't have insurance, they don't have the wherewithal to kind of, look forward for a better year. They really just go into extreme poverty, very oftentimes into debt. I've spoken to many women who were farmers, rice farmers, who, in order for them to do their harvest, would have taken a loan in terms of seeds or just in terms of people supporting. And then when the crop fails, they have no option, they feel, but to come to the city and just try and make a living trading. And many people will come individually and then think that they will go back to the rural areas, but it doesn't happen. The next thing that comes is the children come, and then the spouse comes, and I've visited or driven past, not really visited, villages which are pretty much empty, and everyone's in the city. So we've seen our population go from 1 million people in 2015 to close to 2 million now. There's a census being done at the end of this year, and I am absolutely certain that the population will register above 2 million. That's in line with the World Bank projection that was done in 2018 when they did a projection about the economic engine of Freetown, an urban sector review. And the projection then was that by 2028, the population would be 2 million. I think it's going to surpass that. Now, when you say what's the impact of climate change, people would normally think, oh, it's the floods, it's the droughts, but it's actually the population growth. And that population growth itself is exacerbating all the other challenges, because people coming into a space as small as ours, those mountains that were once green, are really now destroyed, as populations people just find places to live, but they also are in more danger because you fled because of climate change, but you're now more as exposed now to natural disasters, because there are mudslides, landslides, and then flooding on the coast, where a number of informal settlements have also risen. So we now have 82 informal settlements in the city, and 45% of the population of the city living in informality. That's a major challenge. And this is not a climate change conversation, but, as such, but very often when I am speaking on a climate change platform, the reminder that I give to people is that what happens with those who contribute the most to the climate change that we're experiencing is so insignificant when you compare it to the suffering of those who do not contribute to climate change. Because when only 4% of global emissions come from Africa, it's a bit unfair, but this is what is the reality, that over 80-90% of the impact of climate change is felt in the global south.
And so these are an amazing set of challenges that have kind of compiled on top of one another. What are
Polycrisis.
Yeah, exactly. What are the key things that you've been doing since you came in as mayor in order to, you can't, stop climate change all yourself, but you've talked a lot about making Freetown more resilient to the effects of climate change. And how have you gone about that?
Okay, so I know there's a bit of a heavy topic and everybody's looking really low. So just smile for a minute. In spite of those challenges, we have and continue to make significant progress. And the way we think about it, when I came into office, we looked at all of these issues, and we did so with our residents. We developed a development agenda, which we called Transform Freetown in my first term. I'm in my second term, and it's now called Transform Freetown, Transforming Lives, the sequel. But there's a real important reason for that additional transforming lives, and that's a realization that without land use planning and building permits, the two most important urban management tools, which we don't have at Freetown City Council. Unfortunately, our government has not devolved those key functions. When you say transform Freetown, immediately the expectation is a spatial transformation. A spatial transformation is only possible if you're able to control spatial interventions, which we cannot. So moving from Transform Freetown to Transform Freetown, Transforming Lives, we put an emphasis on changing the lives of our residents. In everything that we do, we have sought to be inclusive. In our first term, at the start of development of Transform Freetown, we engaged 15,000 of our residents and really spoke to them about what their issues were, but within our framework. In this second term, we've done so with 4,800. So that was in 2023. What's the framework? The framework now, not very different to previously, so I'll just tell you what it is now, is 4 clusters. The clusters are climate action, not surprising. The vast majority of what we do in climate action is vast majority of what we do is climate action, whether it's mainly mitigation, so sort of the cushioning our residents against the impacts of climate change, whether it's from heat or afforestation. Then the second of our clusters is tourism, heritage tourism, recognizing that there's a need for economic growth and knowing the potential of our city. The third is the digital economy, which is an area for skills development, particularly for our young people. And the fourth is human capital development, which is where we look at water, education, skills education, water, sanitation. Is that right? Yes. Health and food through urban farming. There you go. All of what we're doing in Transform Freetown, Transforming Lives, we did in Transform Freetown. We've just changed the order of priority. In Transform Freetown, we had 19 targets. In Transform Freetown, Transforming Lives, we have a single target. We're still working through similar interventions, but that single target now is recognizing that 70% of the population of our city is under the age of 35, and 70% of those young people are unemployed or underemployed. So we've moved from having specific targets around, improving sanitation, waste collection by 60%, targets like that, they're still embedded, but we now have one overarching target, which is to create 120,000 jobs for women and youth by 2028. To do that, we still move through these critical pathways. And those pathways are breaking down what we do within climate action. So for example, in climate action and what we've done, a critical pathway, we have 9 critical pathways. A critical pathway in climate action is to invest in reforestation, green energy, and heat resilience and adaptation. What are we doing with reforestation? We set ourselves a goal in 2019 of planting 1 million trees. Freetown, the tree town. We've now planted 1.2 million trees, and by the end of the year, it'll be 1.7 million trees. We've moved our focus from terrestrial trees to mangroves, but when it comes to jobs, what we've done with our digitization is that every single tree is digitally tracked. It's tagged, it has a unique identifier code, and we employ young people to plant, to grow, because we grow, not just plant, and then to report back on the monitoring of the trees. We're going into the carbon market now. We're almost completed our carbon accreditation process. We have challenges. I haven't mentioned yet that I'm the opposition. I'm in the opposition, so I have challenges. We have challenges, and we're waiting on government for a concession agreement, which will enable us to complete that process. Heat resilience, we're working with women, building shade covers in open markets. 60% of Freetown's population, so I said 60% of rural are subsistence farmers, right? So 60% of Freetown's population are informal, work in the informal sector, many of which, in terms of, particularly for women, are traders. And most of those markets are outdoor markets. So with the increased temperatures of climate change, that means more heat stress, means more risk to produce. So we've provided cold rooms, or we're providing cold rooms powered by biodigesters, and providing heat covers, shade covers, working with young people, also bringing solar lights. We introduced, and this will sound so strange to you, but it's so true. We introduced the first ever wastewater treatment plant. Before I was mayor, there was no wastewater treatment. Literally, the vacuum trucks just emptied on, yep, they did. So now we have not only a wastewater treatment plant, but we are also using that fecal sludge and converting it into briquettes for clean energy. And that technology, and it's on a smaller scale, is being used to create biogas, which we're using in the markets that I've just described to power cold rooms. So from water kiosks to nursery schools for the children of market women, there's a range of interventions that we've done which have had the impact not necessarily of transforming the built environment, which we can't do anything about, but certainly transforming lives and building in systems and creating opportunity.
So a bunch of these different initiatives that you just talked about, right? We were talking earlier how, some of them are funded through grants from aid. There's been, I think, a big controversy in this country, but also in other places about, what's exactly the way to make aid effective? How can you make it help the people you're trying to help without undermining systems or displacing local capacity? How have you thought about that in, now I guess the 12 years that you've been back in Sierra Leone? What's the right role for aid? What's the right role for private sector investment? What's the right mix of these things in order to help generate the funds and the capital in order to undertake these policies and transformations you've been talking about?
So the best way to use development finance is for it to be used by the user and not for the development financier to determine what gets done. And that's what I changed when I came into office. So when we're developing Transform Freetown, and even with Transform Freetown, Transforming Lives, we had the focus groups I mentioned with the residents, but we also brought in all the international development partners and NGOs. And we said, this is what this is what the people are concerned about. This is the framework that we're working to. And in doing that, our conversation was, you can come along and work with us to develop solutions that work for us, or you can not come along and not be part of this. But what we don't do is have you come and say, this is what we're doing. It's got to be what we want done, and it's got to work for us. Otherwise, you will get cookie cutter solutions being imposed. And I've seen that. I've seen attempts at that. I've seen that in practice, and it's not beneficial to anyone. So it's not something that I encourage. And I don't say this in a bad way or a negative way. You'll actually find that where you need development finance, which we currently do, because there are challenges which can be overcome but have not yet been, where you need development finance, if you are clear on your plan. So if anybody has the time and would like to have a look at our website, if you go to fcc.gov.sl, fcc.gov.sl, yes, you will see you'll see all our plans, and you'll see all our reports every year. And you'll see that for every critical pathway, we have a series of interventions, and you'll see that we've articulated this. So if you're a development partner, you're not coming to say, this is what I want you to do. You're having a look at what we've done. We're discussing it together. We say, well, this is what we want to do. This is the gap. We've got this bit finance, but we've got the gap here. Can you come on board here? And that's just the way we approach things. And it works, and I think it's actually welcomed by those who are providing the finance, because it makes their job easier. Where does the private sector come in? Sustainability. Aid will never develop anybody. And I'm not under any illusions of that. The only reason that, we find ourselves in this position is historic, faults to be laid on in many quarters. I won't go into that now, because that would take a whole other hour. But I think I said at lunchtime, for those who were there at lunchtime, that my first degree is economics, and I did my dissertation as a 20-year-old undergrad. I did my dissertation, like econometric modeling, on the impact of devaluation on our currency, given the nature of our imports and the nature of our exports. And it did not take a rocket scientist to know that devaluation was going to fail, that we were going to end up with a greater trade deficit, and more dependency. But yet those were IMF policies back in the 1980s, policies which they've now said, oops, sorry, we got that wrong. So I know from that experience, I know from the work I've done subsequently, that aid has a place. Foreign assistance has a place, but its place has to be limited, and there has to be mutuality in terms of the benefit, because it does benefit the giver quite a lot. And what has not been done very well is making sure that the receiver is benefiting as well as it should. And that is, again, because of a number of issues which do not exclude leadership and corruption and so on. But there is a place as a bridge, I see it. But the place that is really needed, the finance that's really needed in order for there to be growth at the city level, as well as, because it will move from the city up to the national, is private sector investment, local private sector investment, local businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises. They are the creator of jobs. So what we do with our water kiosks, we are having them outsourced for management by a local firm. With the markets that we're building, we're having management outsourced, because city councils can do things as well. We can manage, but they're not famously great at managing well. So it's actually important to create business opportunities. I mean, with the Freetown, the Tree Town, we've created business opportunities for nurseries. We've created business opportunities for, not just for the youth, but for the kids, the young people working in the digital space. With the work that we're doing with trying to make Freetown capitalize on its beauty and have it as a destination. We're not targeting the world. We're targeting our neighbors. We're targeting Liberia. We're targeting Guinea. That is creating opportunities. We partner with musicians. We partner with fashion designers, just supporting business. So we do see the role for the private sector at the small scale as well as the large scale.
So let's kind of circle back in the conversation to some of these challenges that you were talking about when you were just starting out as mayor. And, just solving these policy problems in, the most well-resourced and supportive environment already is a real challenge. But, you are trying to do this and, you mentioned the lack of resources in the city government. There are entrenched interests. There's corruption. There's especially after the first few years, very kind of difficult national government, and that's something cities around the world are dealing with, how to get what they need to get done in the presence of a government that's less than supportive at times. How have you dealt with the dual challenge of trying to figure out and implement these different policy solutions, but at the same time trying to change this system in which you started out to be one that's more responsive, that's more focused on this kind of accountability that you've been emphasizing?
So from the perspective of you can think of the institution, and then you can think of the city more generally. So from an institution perspective, change is always difficult. Most people resist change because of uncertainty, being sure, what they're going to get out of it, etc. But in an environment where there hasn't been performance management and there hasn't been huge expectations, it's been a really, really fascinating experience. I have had staff come up to me and say, I am so proud now to say I work at Freetown City Council, because we're doing this and we're doing that. And people, sort of have a different respect for us, or they have respect for us now. But then you have other staff who are like, they won't tell me directly, but we have an expression, Yudi pu bread na mi mouth. So in English, it's you're taking the bread from my mouth. So where you've had systems that work for your personal benefit and can no longer do so, that's not met with sort of acceptance, or that's often met with resentment. So it's a mix. But I think the bigger picture is being able to just keep going. When we introduced the digitized property rate system, that was really met with resistance. It was met with resistance internally first. It took a very long time for us to get it through. And then the week when we started distributing the demand notes, the system was in place. We had printed all the demand notes. The teams were out. Then the national government announced that they put out a press release and said no one should pay property rates. And not only did they put out the press release, they then had it on radio and television. It was like scrolling on your TV. No matter what program was on, do not pay property rates. And the excuse was that we hadn't followed due process, but we had. We know, and we knew we had. That took another 9 months to unlock. But today, this was in 2020. We unlocked in about February 2021. Today in 2026, the government is now using the system we designed and has rolled it out into other cities in the country. And they had to get World Bank funding to do so, but it was recognized that this was a game changer for revenue mobilization, own source revenue mobilization for cities. No matter, these are secondary cities, much smaller than Freetown. But nevertheless, so just being dogged and consistent and determined to not give up. I was told when I came that there had been previously 2 previous attempts to digitize property rate. And, it was like, you're not going to succeed. But here we are. We did it. And I think that in terms of the question of how that change goes, we've just done worked with OpenStreetMaps to do because we use satellites for those original. The original development of the system, but we've just worked with OpenStreetMaps, and that we now have high resolution, right down to 3-meter level drone images of the entire city. Having those maps just revolutionizes our ability to do so much had we had the planning rules or planning power, but we've also been like a dog with a bone on the planning powers. And we have advocated, and now with the support of the World Bank, the government has now updated the Town and Country Planning Act and devolved those functions to the councils. For us to make this implementable, we need to get the regulations done. They're underway. That's dragging. And it will drag, but we will get there. And when we get there, I think it'll be the beginning of a massive change, at least in theory, because I've come to find the difference between theory and practice in governments can be quite vast.
So you mentioned some of the powers like planning or spatial policy that the federal government has, or national government in Sierra Leone, and you've announced yourself as a candidate for the next presidential election in Sierra Leone. How do you think about taking, or say translating, the types of policy focus, the types of approaches that you've used as mayor at the local level, and translating those up to what might work both from a policy perspective and from reforming the systems perspective at the national level? How are those the same? How are those different? How are you thinking about that?
I think it kind of worked top down, and now it's going bottom up. So after Ebola, you mentioned, I think, that I served as the team lead for the President's Delivery Team for the post-Ebola recovery program, working with McKinsey. That's a program that was national. And we use this concept of performance, of targets from district down to chiefdom, down to village. And so that level of intervention, it's the model I use for the city. So coming down to individuals, to communities, and having, if you look at the Transforming Lives report or the Transform Freetown, you'll see that, we can tell you what the priorities are by community, out of the, our 9 critical pathways. So I've seen that you can implement, ideate, and then implement at a disaggregated level, from the national perspective. And I suppose in deciding to run for office, what's been the most important factor for me has been the level to which local government is handicapped by central government policies as well as practices. And there is, in as much as there's no development that comes from aid, there's also no development that comes just from the national level. You need local government. You need local government to be effective. You need local government to be resourced. And you need local government to have appropriate mandates for there to be development that's sustainable and that's actually making an impact in the lives of people. So we have a percentage of our budget as local councils. There are 22 local councils in Sierra Leone. We have a percentage of our budgets, which is the fiscal transfer from government. Typically I think I looked this up, I think in the US it's about 52% on average of local government budgets that come from the national government or state government come from above you. In Freetown, when I came into office, it was 48% came from government. It's now 20-something%. But you have a significant number of councils for which 80 to 90% of their budget comes from the central government. Now, since 2025, January to date, March 2026, central government has not dispersed a penny to any local council. That from the perspective of interventions, whether it's, public health, whether it's schools, that lack of commitment to local government and therefore to people is something that troubles me greatly. But beyond that, I think it's also we survive as a capital city because we have innovated, in addition to the property tax, we have a number of other things. We digitize local tax, even though the level is so low, it's almost, sometimes I say it's almost not worth collecting. But we've created other opportunities through resource mobilization, where we're able to deliver services to our residents. We have a care block being built right now in Susan's Bay, which is providing training to women who weren't able to finish school or have access because they're caring for dependents, whether it's elderly parents or persons with disability. We just have a range of interventions going on that we're able to do because we're able to resource mobilize. For councils that can't do that, they're stuck. What motivates me to run for office? I see a country with massive potential. We have 17 of the world, I think it's 12 of the world's 17 rare earth minerals. We have gold, we have diamond, we have bauxite, we have rutile. We had, because we still have, but so much of it's been destroyed, a beautiful natural environment. No, it's still beautiful. Don't cancel your trip. It's still absolutely stunning. We have breathtakingly beautiful beaches, and we have wonderful people. I hope I'm a good ambassador. But we also have abject poverty. We are among the 5 poorest countries in the world. There is no excuse for that. And there's no reason for that other than poor leadership and a dysfunctional governance system. Because, as I said before, you can't develop a country from a ministry level. You can only really make interventions which are going to be meaningful and close enough to the people by ensuring that you've got local governments who are in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west. You can't sit in the capital and develop Sierra Leone. We need that decentralization and that devolution of powers and the resources behind those powers to happen. And we also need leadership that is committed to seeing that potential that Sierra Leone has convert to reality. We've heard enough. We've had a short straw on a lot of things. I know there's a lot going on in the world, but we've had a civil war. We've had Ebola. We had a landslide that killed 1,000 people in 2017. Before people were talking about landslides, like it's something that happens every day. And in all of that, there's a tendency for this expression to be used over and over. Oh, we're resilient people. I think Sierra Leoneans are tired of being resilient people. They just want to be happy people. And that's what I'm seeking to do with running for president.
That's really inspiring. Tell us how, and actually, let me just pause to say that we're getting towards the part of the conversation where we're going to take questions from the audience. And so we'll get to that in a second. We have a student who's going to come around with a microphone. So start to think about what your questions are, and we'll get to them next. You've talked about the local governments. You talked about the national government. How do you think about the role of civil society in the communities here? And I'm thinking about that, not only from a development perspective, but also as part of that democratic accountability system. This is on my mind because there's a researcher here who, was unfortunately forced to seek asylum outside of Sierra Leone as a result of some of his reporting on corruption of past governments. And how do you pull in that strength and harness them towards what you're talking about, as opposed to driving those types of individuals away?
Right. So civil society play a very important role. And something that's become really evident for me personally in this last 8 years is how susceptible we all are to the narratives of civil society. So we think of civil society as being independent. That's what they're meant to be. But in a low resource environment, civil society can be a voice, and civil society can be captured. When you have a government that's capturing state institutions, civil society don't get left behind. And we have seen a situation where voices that I thought were independent voices became political voices. And the civil society space now, for me, is a thin one. But I think those who have remained consistent, challengers of government from one administration to the next, they're few and far between, but they're the ones that command the most respect. So in this administration, we have really seen the disappearance of many civil society voices. And we're seeing some of those who remain under attack, being called opposition leaning, accused of taking bribes. But if you see a civil society actor challenge the previous government and challenge this government, then they're real. And I have full respect for those.
Previous government was
the government that,
your party, and
yes.
then the current government is the SLPP.
Yeah, and the previous government. So I came into office. That first question when I answered, if I had known, if only I had known. I came into government with the ticket of the All People's Congress when they left government. So I came in on my own. Not on my own. There were other mayors and chairpersons in districts, and there were members of parliament. But being the mayor of the capital city, when you have a government from another party, is really having the hot seats.
So let's go to questions from the audience. I see the first one up here. Tony, if you want to. Over here, and then we'll go over there next. Go ahead.
Thank you. This was wonderful. If I get the story correctly, you sort of arrive, you become mayor of the largest town, the capital city of Sierra Leone, and manage as the opposition to increase the fiscal and political operational autonomy of the city quite significantly by mobilizing a local tax base and strategically using external aid in the face of a government that still doesn't want to give you control over land use and zoning. I don't know what the situation is with the schools, given the young population. And now, if I understand correctly, you're running for president.
You understand correctly.
And with some intention here of trying to generalize the opportunities that local control has given the major city to the other 22 jurisdictions, 21 jurisdictions. And I guess my kind of technical wonky question in this is to what degree does Sierra Leone, Freetown has come off fiscal transfers to a significant degree from the national government. How to give the poorer jurisdictions of the rest of the country a chance, they're going to require more transfers and greater control over them. So what is their base revenue coming from, and will equalization be a part of the scene, and how much of that equalization is going to have to come out of the hide of Freetown?
That's a good question. So the revenue base differs. Their revenue potential, the mining that I just mentioned, that's happening everywhere. Fishing, that's happening in places like Puchon, Bonth, timber. So there are opportunities, but they're not being They're not being harnessed by the local governments. They're being captured at the central level, and then they're not coming back down. And that's really got to change.
But usually national governments retain control over mineral wealth.
Yes, you can retain control, but you can have a proportion that gets, they have what they call land. They have these land royalties, but they're not really very generous. And it's heartbreaking. It's painful to see the extraction and the environmental destruction that comes with the extraction. The poor laws that mean the waters are polluted. So you're taking from them and really not putting anything back in. Giving them greater control, giving them greater share. It doesn't mean that it has to go from the mining company directly to the local council, but what government is meant to give them needs to reflect what they're contributing to the national revenue. And it goes deeper than that. The terms on which these arrangements are made also need to be more favorable to the country, and then you have more that can come to the different districts.
I'm going to stand up because I think I'm hiding back there behind everyone. I just wanted to thank you first for being here. I'm so excited you're here as one of the two people who has been to Sierra Leone and particularly to Freetown. I know it's a really long journey, and I had been there before they had the new airport. So a couple times I've been there. My name's Alethea DeRogers. I'm a professor in psychiatry here. I've actually led a few research projects focused on youth mental health in Sierra Leone. And my question is somewhat related to that. I'm aware about the Kush epidemic in Sierra Leone, particularly in some of these informal settlements in Freetown, and also the mounting fentanyl epidemic. And I'm wondering, as mayor, what types of strategies, programs, policies, interventions you're thinking about to try to address that, or maybe ones you've already put in the works. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay. So that's been an interesting experience or interchange between myself and government. I'll give you just an overview, and then if you're still interested, please just look up Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr and Kush. So I started off the first.
And just for those who don't know, tell the audience what Kush is. Yeah.
So Kush is a synthetic drug. It's a zombie drug that kind of came onto the scene in Freetown in about 2021. And it's become, we have a drugs crisis, definitely. It's become a major hub. Freetown has become a major hub for it, but also, sadly, there's also a cocaine baron, Europe's most wanted man, who is currently residing in Freetown and is being protected. And I've been thinking the other day, I walked into my hotel room and I looked around and I'm like, am I safe? I've been talking about this quite a lot. So I won't say too much right now because I think you can look it up. Just look that up. Now, in 2022, I began to notice something. I began to notice that we were picking up corpses from the streets, dead bodies. And I called the team and I was like, what's going on? And we realized that it was linked to the Kush pandemic. So we brought in a roundtable of people working in the space to see how we could collaborate and support with the limited resources or the zero resources that we had. That engagement happened around the time I was leaving office because the council dissolves at the time of the general elections. So when I came back in 2023, I beg your pardon. When I came back in 2023, I realized that it was even more pronounced. And so I began to collect data. We set up a burial team, and we weren't looking at it from the perspective only of dealing with the mental health, because we don't have the resources, nor do we have the personnel to do that. But we focus principally on the public health of having this literally bodies on the streets. I wrote letters, I made calls, and got no response. In September 2025, I wrote to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and said, I can no longer be a part of normalizing the abnormal. It cannot be okay to be picking up bodies from the streets on an almost daily basis. There has to be an investigation. We need something to be done. I got a reply saying, I'll come back to you. In October, I was on TV, a popular television program, and I was asked, Mayor, you've been talking about this. How many bodies have you picked up? By that date, it was 227. And when I said that, then I got attention. And the government wrote back to me and said I was creating a public alarm, that action would be taken, I would be investigated, and I must provide evidence. Well, I'm a data girl. So we had dates, gender, location, where they were buried, because we'd actually set up a whole process, because we needed to be by body bags, disinfectant, tarpaulin. And so the government, the president, called a big meeting of stakeholders. He had previously, a year before, announced a national emergency, but nothing had really changed. So there was this big meeting, and the long and short of it, we were told, you don't pick them up anymore, the police will. And you just bury them. So that means we don't get the data anymore. It means we're removed from the face of it, the cold face, as it were. But it is a major problem. It's one that I'm not resourced to handle. But what I do is continue to lift my voice and amplify and say this is not right. We have, if we're picking up hundreds of bodies by October, those are the bodies that we pick up. There'll be more dying behind the scenes in people's homes. There was a survey done by Afrobarometer, who are a very well-known and highly respected. They're more than a polling agent, but they do surveys, and they asked the question of a cross-section of Sierra Leoneans: how many people actually knew someone who was a Kush victim, or personally, or knew someone, or sort of one removed, a family member or a neighbor. Over 90% of Sierra Leoneans. That's how bad it is. In running for office, I am not unaware of the scale and the magnitude of the problems that our country faces. But I also know, as I keep saying, that we don't have the ingredients to make Kush in Sierra Leone. It's coming from across borders. And as long as that is allowed to happen, we will have that problem. This problem is not being experienced at the same degree in neighboring Liberia, or in Guinea, or in Ghana, or in Gambia. Yes, they do have a problem, because it will always, these things will always cross borders. But the scale of it is happening because it's being allowed to happen.
And so, just to follow on that, if you had the power to change these different policies, what would you do to combat this? Is it about the drug interdiction with the drugs coming in? Is it about changing the underlying circumstance of the people that are turning to this? Is it about increasing other public health supports?
I think my number one, I keep saying it, my number one is preventing it from coming in. When you have drugs on every street corner, you're going to have a drugs crisis. So when the availability isn't there, it's easier then to deal with the underlying. I mean, the underlying is part of everything I've been talking about: the lack of jobs, the lack of opportunities, the converting of, the mindset, because we don't have to import many of the things that we import. If you have to make space for the growth of industry, for value addition of your raw products, of your commodities. These are things that you must be deliberate about. They don't happen overnight, but they don't happen unless you are deliberate about making them happen. And when it comes to the drugs, I mean, I've heard young people being blamed, but I don't blame them. I blame those who are making huge profits off of their misery.
Dan, over here.
Thank you very much. I'm one of the other two people who's been into Sierra Leone. I was a Peace Corps volunteer there for 3.5 years in the mid-1980s, and it changed my life for the very good. I want to ask you a follow-up question about media and politics in Sierra Leone, and specifically about the issue of press freedom. For about 1.5 years, the Africa Initiative here at the Watson School has hosted a postdoctoral research associate, Dr. Cherno Ba, who's a Sierra Leonean scholar who earned his PhD from Northwestern University in Chicago. Before starting his PhD at Northwestern, he had a career as an investigative journalist in Sierra Leone. And because of his reporting, he received significant harassment and regular death threats to the point where he fled Sierra Leone. He sought and was awarded political asylum in the United States. He has continued to experience harassment and receive death threats in the 10 years he's been here, perhaps because he continues to pursue investigative journalism and publish his findings. He has a wife and 2 young sons, and at times they all live in fear. My questions are 3, and I will ask them very briefly and all at once. First, are you aware of Dr. Ba's case? And if so, could you please share what you know? 2, could you please articulate your views about freedom of the press in general and for Sierra Leone? And 3, finally, either in your current capacity as Freetown's mayor, or should you reach some higher office, would you be willing to say publicly here that you condemn any and all efforts to threaten and harass Dr. Ba, and that you would pursue and support criminal prosecution of any persons known to be carrying out such threats?
Well, with the first one, I do know Cherno. We've spoken on the phone at the time when he was doing investigation. I've used his material many times. He did a very thorough piece on the per diems, the cost of travel of the president and his wife. He did a very, very thorough piece, which has been vindicated, I think, because the IMF's or the World Bank's last economic update, if you happen to have read that, one of the reasons that they gave for the fact that our foreign currency reserve is so low at the time of writing, I think it was in November, they said we had 1.5 months of foreign currency reserve left. And they specifically mentioned, in addition to the opening of unnecessary embassies, they specifically mentioned the excessive travel, international travel budget of the president and his wife. So that investigation was very very useful, and one that I referred to. Your second question was
media freedom in Sierra Leone.
Media freedom has room for improvement. I mean, not just media freedom, freedom of speech. Freedom of speech has room for improvement. The Secretary General of our party is currently in court for a statement he made at a party event, APC party event on the 31st of January this year. There's a young lady who is also, she's not only in court, she's actually in custody and has been for 1.5 months now, for a statement which she made, which was deemed to be incitement. I attend her court cases. I go to pretty much everyone that I can, just as a solidarity, as many other women do, many other women leaders do. We've all sat in the court when the video was played. Maybe she was a bit too exuberant in her expression, but I mean, I think there is such a closing of the space that, that it's, I would definitely say freedom of expression is under threat. freedom of expression is under threat. I mean, I was in court for disorderly behavior. And what did I do? I challenged the arrest of my counselor when we were at the airport heading to the UN General Assembly meetings. And he was arrested, no warrant. We're literally about to board a flight. And when I questioned that, I was charged to court for disorderly behavior. And there's an 18-month jail time for that. Eventually, my case was dropped as part of the wider Agreement for National Unity, which was an agreement that the government signed with our party in October 2023. This is a case that happened in 2022. Making a statement, I don't feel there's a need for me to make a particular statement. I mean, I stand with everybody for freedom. And I think that's clear from the things that I've said, but I don't feel there's a need for me to make a particular statement about a particular individual. But I have, tremendous respect for Cherno, and please do send in my best regards.
Hi there. Thank you so much for that. I'm Jennifer Nuzzo. I'm director of the Pandemic Center here at Brown. I just wanted to thank you for your leadership, but particularly for your willingness to volunteer during the Ebola crisis. And I'm so struck by what you said about how you were able to get elected and started as mayor, particularly promising to raise taxes, knowing that that came after the Ebola crisis, where it was tremendous hardship, tremendous loss. There were also protests. And so I'm thinking of that moment and then your leadership during the pandemic and how so vastly it differs from the US experience, where we don't have national unity. I can't imagine a politician could run on a platform of raising taxes, even though there is work to be done. And I'm just wondering, how could you talk about sort of the sentiment and the experience in Ebola and how that did or did not help you in making that argument, and then also what that meant for leading the response locally to COVID-19?
Thanks. So I think Ebola was such a defining moment for me. My experience of working on that outbreak, and I've always come back to Sierra Leone. So you'd have got from my my bio that I worked in the UK. I went to LSE after my first degree at Fabric College. So my first degree was at University of Sierra Leone. I graduated in '88. So I don't know if you were. What year were you there?
I was already done. I left in 87.
Okay. So we were there. I was there when you were there. So I graduated in '88, was at LSE 89, 90, and then worked with Arthur Andersen, as it was then, through that period of the war. And I campaigned against the trade in blood diamonds. I led a demonstration on Hatton Gardens. Those of you who might know the UK know Hatton Gardens is a famous diamond street. I shut it down, not my own. That was never the intention. De Beers did call me to a meeting and told me, young woman, you're way above your head. You should cancel. I did not cancel. I did not tell them to go home. They went home on their own. But that helped raise the profile. And in our own little way, we contributed to the Kimberley process. I set up a not-for-profit. I worked with kids affected by the war, with women affected by the war around the country. I did all this while still, running my own, having my career. But when Ebola happened, that same inability to just ignore led me. And I remember actually, I had surgery just a few weeks before. And, so I was lying in bed and saw the pictures. The closure of the airport was that moment, 31st of July, 2014. And I got up and I was like, I have to go help. And my husband was like, you're not a doctor, go lie down. And I suppose you would know that you don't need to be a doctor. And I began to mobilize, to campaign, to call everybody, MSF, Save the Children, UK Med. And within a short period of time, just from being, getting on everyone's nerves, I was asked by the UK government to join their team and started to meet with them at Whitehall every week to help plan the UK's response. Coming out of that, was the Lancaster, for those of you would know, for the Lancaster House meetings when it was finally agreed that yes, this was a pandemic and it needed the world's attention and we needed others to come on board with financing to prevent it from sort of the spread. That was October. November, I was like, the numbers are going up and I'm not staying here. And I went. If I learned anything from that experience, I've always, like I said, had my heart in Sierra Leone, always been involved in one way or the other. But if I learned anything, it was the importance of nothing for us without us, community. So when I went, there was this social mobilization going on, messaging going to people, to not touch, to not bury to not wash the dead, because that's a part of the tradition. To not visit people who had been exposed, but it wasn't really resonating. And there was a Ugandan doctor there in the response from WHO called Dr. Yoti, Zebulon Yoti. And he said to me, he'd been in a number of Ebola outbreaks. He said to me, talk to them under the mango tree. Don't talk at them, talk with them. And that really changed my perspective. And we totally changed social mobilization to community engagement. And that's when we began to make the difference. And then I got the local council involved because the councillors are influencers in their communities. And we developed something called Operation Western Area Surge. And in 3 weeks, we actually got the curve to bend and start going down. So that experience has influenced completely the way I do governance, totally. You know, nothing for us without us. I engage our informal settlements. So I said before, 45% of our residents are living in an informality. They are key stakeholders for me. And I remember when I first met I guess he's the chairman of the informals, of FERDUP. It's a Federation of Urban and Rural Poor, otherwise known as Association of Slum Dwellers. He was like, oh, you know, politicians are all the same. They just come when it's election time and then they make all these promises and then they disappear. I was like, you don't know me. You've never met me. I don't know why you have so much anger, but just let's have a conversation. When I won, even before I was sworn in, they were the first organization that I sat with. And I sit with them constantly. We work in tandem and lots of stuff gets done because you can't use your language to reach everybody. You need to reach them with their language. And sometimes you need an intermediary in order to make sure messages get across.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have 2 questions. They're following through each other. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. There's several global conversations when they are talking about...
Why don't you just give them both and then she can answer them?
Okay.
But
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so several global conversations about cities of the future, usually or oftentimes they focus on places like Singapore, they focus on places like Copenhagen. From your experience in Freetown, what lessons do you think the rest of the world is underestimating? And then, you know, following that, building on that question, if the world is going to add billions of new urban cities or urban residents in the coming decades, many of them in African cities like Freetown, what is one decision city leaders must get right today to avoid locking in inequality for future generations or for the generations to come?
Okay, so, you know, there's Singapore, Copenhagen. These, I actually know both their mayors. And they are cities of the future, but everybody's future is different depending on what your present is. And what we have to recognize is that the present of many is not Copenhagen, it's not Singapore. There are 48,000 conurbations, which are termed cities in the world today. And the vast majority of them are in the global south. So they don't look like Singapore and Copenhagen, but there's a lot to learn from Singapore and Copenhagen. What is there that can be learned from Freetown? Well, Phoenix, Arizona Kate Gallagher, for those of you who may know her, she's the mayor there. One of the things I love, we're both members of C40 City Board, but she has used Freetown the Treetown for their urbanization, their urban greening program. New Haven, Yale, we work with them, and they have also worked with Freetown the Treetown as a model. So there are things that we can learn both ways. And our community, the element of Freetown the Treetown that Phoenix have used is the community engagement, the using residents as opposed to just using contractors for that sense of ownership and that sense of sustainability. With respect to the second part of your question, which was?
What's like one thing that it's important for mayors to get?
To lock in, to not lock in inequality, land use planning. Land use planning. That is our biggest issue. As we have more natural disasters, as we see, temperatures rising, and with that, more extreme precipitation, being able to protect your residents will require effective use of the land for providing housing as populations move. The level of migration is going to increase. There's a lot of, Juan is here, or he's gone. We work together on climate mobility. You have millions of people moving because of climate change, but you also have millions of people moving because of conflict. And from the perspective of city leadership, being able to provide for those coming into your city, because that's where everyone's moving into. It's people are moving into the urban spaces. Of course, I think food security, urban farming is something else which I think is very important now. We're developing an urban farm. We've been working on urban farming over the last 8 years, but we're actually now trying to bring some more innovation into that with hydroponics, and also looking to see how, once we get we've got a structure that we're using as an urban farm, which used to be a transfer station, and then we're hoping to move that into schools. But for all of this, any of this to actually be effective, we need the political will, and we need the political space, and that's something else that often gets sort of overlooked. The effectiveness of mayors can be significantly impacted by their relationship with their central government. You can be stopped from getting things done. And that's really detrimental to your residents. So I truly believe that we need people in national leadership who understand cities and who understand the importance of local government.
I mean, it seems that Freetown has a lot of problems, but it also has a lot of opportunities based on the problems that it has. Like, for example, it has a very high population per density, but that also means that a very high youth number of workers that are desperate for work. And, a place like Singapore, a place like Seoul in Korea would love to have your birth rate, half your birth rate. You have floods, you have mudslides. That means you have a lot of water, and that's crucial for an agricultural economy. So you're telling me that a lot of your villages are fallow. There's nobody there. There's nobody present. Has there been movement to try to get people back out to the countryside? I understand you're telling me they're going to the urban centers because they're looking for opportunity. And since you have this huge population that not much else to do, has there been an industrial development? Not necessarily mining, but as an example, Vietnam, in the middle of the Vietnam War, Pepsi Corporation opened up a plant over there, bottling plant in the Mekong Delta, and people thought they were smuggling drugs out of there. No, they were making soft drinks. And that 11% of their profits this year came from Southeast Asia because they got a lock on that market. There's a whole untapped market in Africa. I bet you they love to drink soda over there. stuff like that, ideas like that. As a mayor, have you anything to like industrial development, agricultural development, that sort of thing? You're trying to move people to places where they can be useful. Anyway, that's my.
No, thank you. I mean, I think you've actually underscored why national government is so important in this, because a city mayor has a jurisdiction over her jurisdiction. You're not in a position to, sort of organize investments into rural communities that are not in your jurisdiction. That's under somebody else's jurisdiction. So where the national government comes in is having that ability to take the helicopter view and say, we need to invest here, create centers of growth. I know that Freetown's problems will be significantly addressed by addressing problems outside of Freetown. When you say you've got a lot of water, I think the point I was making with respect to the agriculture is you can have a lot of water, but you just have it at the wrong time. That will destroy your harvest. Yeah, but that's a national government, and that's why I'm so convinced that the potential of our country can be realized, because there are answers to these problems. They need to be implemented. They need to be driven through, and for that you need the will to do so. Thank you. So do I.
I think we have time for one more question. Corinne, you want to ask a question? No, okay. Jen, go ahead.
Why?
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. And I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier. So you were talking about tree planting, and it is a policy that is near to my heart because I study climate change policy here at Watson. And it has so many benefits, though, beyond climate benefits. And so I was wondering, how you chose to focus on that amongst the range of different issues. And what are some of the challenges? You mentioned challenges integrating into global carbon markets. But what other things have you experienced? Have you been able to get local buy-in? Have you had challenges related to land use planning, all of those sorts of things?
Right. So I grew up climbing trees. Like I said, my father is a professor, was a professor, he's retired now. And in the campus on Furbeck College on Mount Oriole, we were just surrounded by trees. I walked through trees to get to school, streams. Seeing them disappear in front of my eyes really, really was a major driver for that change. The decision to implement Freetown, the Tree Town, was just a rational response to deforestation. If you have deforestation, you need to plant more trees. The figure of 1 million, my team will tell you that when we were doing the brainstorming and sitting in the focus group, and they came up with, I can't remember what the number was, but it was less than 1 million. And I was like, guys, are you sure? I think we need to be more conservative. We need to be let's just take this a step at a time. And then on the day that we launched it, we had no money. We launched it at a ball. We did the mayor's ball at the Radisson Hotel. And the tickets were sold to, 4 trees. We raised $30,000. It was nothing, but we've spent $2 million plus so far, but it got us going. And when I got on the stage and I announced it, I was like, we're going to plant 1 million trees. And my team was like, what? What did you say? Mayor. But this has, I think we punched above our weight and we've gotten there. But the challenges have been enormous. In our first round, we had an 83% survival rate, which is quite significant. But there's a university, we do tree tracking, tree audits. So there's an audit going on right now, and there's been quite a lot of devastation. We agreed with the Ministry of Lands on where we would be allowed to plant. A lot of those have not been, those sites have not been respected. and we've seen our trees cut down. Not by the locals. I mean, you have this. There was one. I went on a visit once to a community called Kaimayama, and this woman came up to me. She was like, "You don't pay me to look after the trees. You pay the young ones, but I'm the tree grandma, and I look after the trees." And she really did. But what would I say are the main challenges for the terrestrial trees, which is why we're focusing more on mangrove now. There's a lot of land grabbing. I've just described to you the population growth, but also this is not just in terms of, people with low economic, the low economic strata. This is also very wealthy people who are getting leases for land which is meant to be in the protected forest area, in the protected parks. So that is a challenge. There's a general challenge also with the timing of funding. If you're working through international development partner financing, sometimes finance release can be very slow, and that can actually impact on your model. So the getting into the carbon market has been really critical for us because it means that we will then have that sustainability. And our only challenge now, we've been working on this for almost 2 years. We have a dedicated team. We won the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, which gave us $1 million towards that and invested in it. We're almost there, but we need a concession agreement signed by government. And we've not got it yet. And I tell the team that we will get it. We will get it. We'll just keep being persistent and we will get it. But, the time windows, we're having to go back and ask for extensions and so on. And I should probably mention the cable car. We did a full feasibility study for a cable car as a means of mass transport because we don't have, you guys probably don't have mass transit here either. But buses. We need it. Buses. We have buses. But, in the absence of a railway or a train, if anybody's familiar with Medellin or La Paz, you'll know that this has been a really effective transport system, reducing carbon emissions, increasing economic productivity, providing more safety, connecting underserved communities. So we spent C40 Finance Facility graciously spent $1 million+. We were able to get the support of one of the two biggest manufacturers, Pomo, who brought to the table the French Treasury, who were prepared to put half the cost of the line, which was $47 million. That was in November 2024. The government did not respond to our request just for approval until September of 2025. And now they're saying that it needs to go to cabinet, and it's now March 2026, and we've yet to find a minister to take it to cabinet. So coming back to this point of how when we look at city effectiveness, stability, political will, collaboration at intergovernmental levels is very important. Ultimately, the beneficiary of the works of any government must be the people. The people should always be first. Sometimes politics gets in the way of that. And I think it's, for someone like me, trying to cut through those challenges is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just feel that if we have a decision maker who is motivated, who has the experience, and who understands where the bottlenecks are, it will make the world of difference to not just to Freetown, but to the country as a whole.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much. Please join me again in thanking the mayor.